I'd like to introduce Carol Miller, Data Dissemination Specialist for the U.S. Census Bureau, to kick us off with what is new at the Census Bureau. Hi, Carol. Good morning.
Good morning. Greetings and welcome to everyone. Hi, my name is Carol Miller, and I'm honored to be invited to the University of Nebraska at Omaha Center for Public Affairs Research Conference. This is exciting for us. I represent the U.S. Census Bureau, and we've partnered with the State Data Center of Nebraska to provide you with trusted sources of data for your community and organization. Together, we fulfill your request for information and provide you with insights into demographic trends or specific data for your work. I'd like to share a couple of news items with you from the Census Bureau. First, we're currently planning for the 2030 census and accepting feedback and ideas. There's a light blue header on the top of our homepage linking you to this planning page. The 2030 census will be the 25th in U.S. history. We'll factor in past census experiences, your feedback, and new research to evolve into the operational design. For the first time, the public can formally give input on planning and designing the next census. Your comments and recommendations are key for this process. The Federal Register notice posted August 17th encouraged everyone to provide input now through November 15th. Every census takes years of planning and preparation, and it's critical we hear your ideas and solidify plans now as the groundwork for the 2030 takes shape. As we get closer, our ability to develop and test and incorporate those new ideas will be limited. So please get your ideas in as soon as possible. The Census Bureau has also begun work on a new survey. It's the Business Trends and Outlook Survey. This summer, the Bureau launched a new experimental survey that will provide bi-weekly business data on businesses of all sizes and a multitude of geographies. The new BTOS is the successor to and builds upon the Small Business Pulse survey, which was created in response to the coronavirus pandemic. The Business Trends survey will capitalize on the success of its predecessor and expand the scope to include large single location employer businesses of 500 or more employees. The business will collect and publish data every 2 weeks, along with measures of quality based on a national representative samples. Information will be provided on a broad array of businesses by sector, state, and the 25 most populous metropolitan statistical areas. And in my session later on this morning, I'll demonstrate our newest tool. It's My Community Explorer. This tool combines select demographic businesses, demographic, business, and resilience data to help users identify potentially underserved areas of the state, county, and community. This tool highlights risk factors such as poverty, disability, vehicle availability, and broadband access to identify areas to measure the capacity of individuals and households to absorb the external stresses of the impacts of a disaster. It currently features disasters like hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, which don't often occur in Nebraska, but it also includes wildfires, temperature, and air quality indexes as well. We asked the developers about things like tornadoes that may occur in Nebraska more often, but they said that, they're hard to pinpoint where and when a tornado will touch down. The conditions may be right, but as any chaser will tell you, it doesn't always materialize that way. We can use county data, though, to assess the impact of a disaster of any kind should one occur. updates to this program are coming in September. So keep an eye out for changes to this tool as well. I want to personally thank Dr. Josie Schafer, the director of UNO and CPAR, and her staff for this partnership and bringing us all together to help you. I want to also thank my colleague, Kim Davis, for sharing her insights into economic data from the Census Bureau as well. I hope you all enjoy our time together and walk away with some fantastic new tools to help you get your work done. Thank you. Josie, back to you.
All right, wait, Carol, hang out with me just a second, because so many exciting things going on. I can't believe we're prepping for 2030. I mean, I know we need to prep that.
Oh, I think we
like,
started in 2021.
yeah, really exciting. I know Nebraska has great participation rates in their census, but I'm really interested. I hope you get a lot of feedback from us. I know so many of us were mobilized.
I hope so too.
Leading up to it, and so I know there's great ideas and thoughts about how to do that. You also mentioned the pulse survey. I think that one is came out during COVID. It was a more sort of real-time data application. I argued that during COVID, their sort of obsession with data and real-time data just went through the roof. And I was like, we don't have that many real-time data sources. So that pulse survey is awesome. I'm really glad it's going to continue in some way. Can I ask you now, I may talk about it later, the 2021 ACS release schedule? Do you know it offhand?
There are new releases scheduled for September.
One year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. That's super exciting. I think people, again, everyone gets so excited about the newest data. But yeah.
It's coming.
We're a little behind from time to time. Okay, so that's the one I probably get the most, is when that ACS data release. There's also been a new newsletter that I've been getting from the Census Bureau that's pretty awesome about those updates. And so I'll just say to everybody, if you're really interested in Census Bureau data release products, let me know and I'll just forward it to you, or you can get on the list. It's kind of just a one pager with what's going on. That's been pretty great lately. Yeah. Carol, thank you so much for spending a couple minutes with us this morning. And then later this morning, we are so excited to learn and work with you. I appreciate it.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Okay, we are moving right along. I was getting phone calls about folks trying to access the system this morning. So we understand it is a time and it is difficult, but again, everyone will have access to recordings, so that'll help later. New to gathering data, start here. I actually get emails throughout the year and people say, hey, when is Census 101? And I think that's a great name for a course. I am not teaching that course here at UNO, teaching municipal administration though this semester, if anyone wants to pop in on that. But we really understand that a lot of folks are looking for some basics in gathering the data, using the data that Census produces that people have come to know. And so that is what this morning's session is about. Start here. We know there's a range of resources. There's a lot of different data products. I think a lot of people just say census data and they think it's all one. It is one resource, the United States Census Bureau, but it is not. There are multiple data products produced by the Census Bureau that we really want to make people aware of because they have different pros, cons, benefits, different uses. And so I'll be really clear about that today. But we're also really trying to target today for that group of folks that write grants, maybe do needs assessments, strategic planning or some type of planning effort, reporting or evaluation. I can think of many times throughout the year where these type of folks email and they need that number. What's that number? Do you remember giving that presentation? What was that? Someone just the other day sent me the actual block of a paragraph of text that they wrote into a grant a couple of years ago, and they're writing the same grant and they just want the updated numbers. Economic development agencies reach out all the time doing kind of those strategic planning efforts. We're doing a project right now with the Iowa tribe of Nebraska and Kansas, and they are looking for all of that updated demographic data just to describe their communities as they plan for the future. And this is who this session is for, right? I'm writing a grant and I need to know X. And so to frame the data I'm going to present, I actually went back into that email inbox, and I have one that's called completed requests, and said, what is the data that folks ask for over and over again? And it tends to be that one quick number they need to do their job. So I'm writing a grant report and evaluation, and I want to know population growth over the last 5 to 20 years. Sometimes it's the last year, sometimes it's the last 100 years. You would not be surprised here in Nebraska that this question comes up a lot, right? Population growth, what's happening? We just had the release of the 2020 census, the official count of everyone in the US. So it is a great time to be thinking about how population has changed, particularly over the last decade, but I'll play around with those years. Migration of the population. Again, classic Nebraska question. How are people moving around the state, as well as where are they moving to and who's moving here? This is another, Chambers of Commerce asks this all the time. Economic development asks this all the time. Businesses really need this type of data. Local governments really need this type of data. Schools need this kind of data. These first two come up all the time in lots of contexts. Nebraska's aging population, especially as it compares to our workforce. With the release of the 2020 census, and nationally, we heard we are an aging country and we are a more diverse country. And so what does that mean for Nebraska? How does that impact us? I think also you can't go anywhere right now in Nebraska and not hear we have a workforce challenge. I think maybe on those all those billboards, we should put, we're hiring, because we are hiring. And so lots of folks are interested in what's that prime age workforce? Is it growing? Is it working? Is it in the labor force? So kind of looking at those trends, another common one. Different racial and ethnic groups, sometimes by counties, sometimes by census tract. You hear this, all different geographies. We'll give you some tools to explore that one. Another one, poverty gets asked a lot. Income and poverty levels, I think it has a lot to do with our workforce. Probably everyone's heard us say that stat. Highest rate in the country for folks that work full-time year-round and are still in poverty, right? So we want to understand all sorts of aspects of poverty, income levels in the state. This particular one, they asked at the block or block group level. So I'll talk a little bit about different geographies and data, just to kind of frame that conversation too. But I bet there's folks on right now that have asked us these questions that look for this data. And sometimes, like I said, they're just looking for what data we use, but we also really want to help you think about how to get that data yourself. I think the Census Bureau has gone through a remarkable transformation. Just in the last 4 years that I've been in this office, I've seen it, right? When I got here, it was still an American Fact Finder. You really had to play around, and it was a lot. If you knew your table number, you were going to get there a lot quicker and things like that. And now with data.census.gov, finding a lot of this data, playing around with this, a lot of this data is a little bit easier. So we are always excited to help disseminate the data, make sure you have what you want. That's part of this presentation, but we also want to be a trusted partner in helping you to do and find this data yourself or explore new data. I'm thinking about one of those grants where somebody just sent me, hey, I need this grant. And I think it was, I won't call people out, but let's say it was related to libraries. They could use a different data point. It might make their point a little bit better, might help them to bring in more money. We're working with the area's agencies on aging, and they had a really interesting one the other day. They have traditionally been using, I think it was population 65 plus by state that are 125% in poverty, 125% of poverty. And that is a really hard data point to get. I have to go to the microdata and get it. Happy to do it. But there are other ways to grab that data. And the Census Bureau actually made, I think it was 150% of poverty very easily accessible. So as long as that data point is an okay data point to use for their purposes, we can guide them to using different data sources that might help them even a little bit more. But that tends to be a little bit more of a process of discovery versus sort of just reaching out for the data. We want you to know we're here for both. We're happy to do both with you, but we're excited to see more people using the census data themselves in the state. Always remember, we put a lot of data on our website that we think Nebraskans ask about often, so you can always go there and try to grab that data or email us. You too next year can be on this list of folks that ask us for data. And we get many, many more of these, but I thought these were really representative. So let's get started. I'm writing a grant report or evaluation and I want to know population growth. And like I said, people ask all different years and time periods and how it's moving around the state. And we're going to dig into all of that. I'm going to use the decennial census for that 2020 census, the 2010 census. You can access that data on data.census.gov. We have also put a lot of analysis on our 2020 census page, sometimes not particularly Nebraska data, but we also did some data for our region, Iowa, Missouri, they're all in there. So go check it out, see what's there. Census Bureau's visualization library is an awesome tool. They are doing a lot more. They are posting a lot. They post across their different products. So just some cool things to check out there. Also going to talk about the U.S. Census Bureau's population and housing units estimates. This is a program that's actually very different than a lot of Census Bureau products in that it's not a survey. It is a statistical product. They look at population change year to year and try to estimate how it will change in certain components. So it doesn't have all that broad, rich demographic data, but it's really good at getting you that sort of bottom number. What's the population for this group? So I'll talk about that as well. Okay, since 2010, Nebraska's population has increased 7.4%, but 69 counties have lost population. Total 2020 population, 1,961,504. We can be really sure that that's the number in 2020. Of course, things have already changed. Here by county, we just have those population change rates, 2010 to 2020. I will say that we were excited. 7.4% overall growth was strong, but we probably underestimated some of that rural population loss that we saw. So you can see red here. Those are the counties that have grown. Douglas, Sarpy, and those outlying counties, Hall County and that Grand Island area, and then that city of Columbus has done really well. You can see in sort of around these counties, there's some sort of mild loss to mild growth, right? But large portions of the state have had pretty significant population loss over those 10 years. So looking not just at total population here, but at that population change 2010 to 2020 using that preeminent source, the decennial census. Here's just a quick look at it. The Census Bureau made this very available. Every county population change, it doesn't have some of the nuance that our map shows, right? So they just say less than 0%, so no growth. But like we said, we saw a lot of dynamics within that population loss. But you can compare to other states, very similar patterns we're seeing here in Nebraska as the region. Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, metropolitan growth and rural loss are pretty common. Idaho, Utah, big gainers. Florida continues to gain, parts of North Carolina, right? New York City still growing, but other parts losing. A lot of that Intermountain West still growing very rapidly. So nice to compare. This goes into the population and housing units estimates program. And as I was saying, this is a statistical program. We got in a little trouble during the redistricting in the legislature because folks were not quite sure what the difference between the population and housing unit estimates program was and what the 2020 census was. And that's completely understandable because I think a lot of people right? The 2020 census, the decennial census is every 10 years. So, but we know a lot about population in between that. And so folks get used to actually using the population and housing units estimates program, which really just tries to give that, here's the population total, here are some of the components of population change. You can see those three right there, as well as some characteristics. They go into age groups and race and ethnicity, total population, that's it. Like I said, it's a statistical program and it relies on the decennial census to recalibrate, right? Over 10 years, the model gets a little, we start to guess and assume a little bit more because we don't have that real number. This particular source came out before the 2020 census. So then folks thought these were the 2020 census numbers. They were not. They did a great job on their website. I remember at one point just emailing that to a senator. The Population Housing Unit Estimates Program said, hey, we're not the 2020 census and we're not the official number that will be. But they do a really good job estimating in between because we can't wait 10 years to know our population. So just a couple areas that they do this in order to be able to statistically estimate that change. And they use a lot of administrative data for survey data. Just FYI. Rate of natural change, births minus deaths. This is a number that is really strong for Nebraska. I ran these numbers for every state and then I just sorted on rate of natural change, right? We love when Nebraska stands out, we're high. 2.2, that suggests for every one person that dies, there's 2 people born. That's more than the replacement rate. That is strong growth. It's a really good indicator that everybody in Nebraska is a Nebraskan, right? We are growing right here at home. That's kind of cool. You'll see international migration, and this is 2020 to 2021. So it was off a little bit, but it's normally around 1%. It was 0.53%, 20 to 2021. There were different movements. I won't say there was just less movement 2020 to 2021, but folks moved differently around the country. And then rate of domestic migration, you will see we are negative 1.7. That means people come in every year from other states, people go out, more people go out than come in. We'll look at the specific numbers for 2020, but that's pretty consistent. So you can see Nebraska strong on rate of natural change. That is how we're growing, right? When we go back to that slide where we're looking at that 7.4% population growth, that is mostly Nebraskans having more Nebraskans. We're growing right here at home because we're really not bringing that many people from other countries and we're losing people to other states every year. Just point out Iowa too, strong on rate of natural change, not as strong as Nebraska, but you can see not, in the top half of the 50 states, little bit stronger rate of international migration, 2020 to 2021. And then they are positive for domestic migration, but very slightly. So not bringing in a ton of folks there. But again, us, and you can see a lot of our region is still in that group for strong rate of natural change, the largest source of our growth. U.S. Census Bureau's visualization library, again, you can see this for every county using that same data that I just used, 2020 to 2021. This is nice. This is Nebraska as a whole. Here you can see it by county. And again, you see that same pattern. We're going to talk more about that too, but you can see the urban areas are growing. We know that growth is through natural change mostly, while a lot of our rural counties are losing some good spots of growth in that year as well. All right. Okay. I'm writing a grant report for evaluation, and I want to know migration of the population, including from parts of Western Nebraska. This comes up in a lot of economic development sort of contexts. A lot of local governments want to know this. This goes into some of that planning that we all do. How are our schools? How are our hospitals? Where are people going to be? How are we going to respond to them? And I know everyone wants to know the future. It's a tough one. We're going to use some population projections in this analysis. But like I said, we've looked at past projections and things do change. And I think that's one of the things I love about studying government. We have the ability to make those changes. We can turn trends. It takes time. It takes a lot of work. But we can kind of follow what we think will happen, but know that these things can really change. Decennial census, again, we will use population projections from UNO CPAR. We did some back in 2015. Those are in Digital Commons. They're linked there. We looked at them with some 2020 data. We didn't have the age data when we looked at it, so we didn't totally update it, but we applied a different model that was a little bit, that sort of calculated the growth rate just a little bit more narrowly. Sorry, can't talk. We're going to use the American Community Survey here. They ask lots of questions on migration. Did you live in the same house? Did you live in the same county? Did you live in a different county, different state? That's where we get a lot of that migration data from. And actually, we have a really great interactive on this, governing.unomaha.edu. Census Bureau has a couple different awesome products that track migration. Everyone's interested in migration. So their Census Flow Mapper, and then this is a very new product. They partnered with Harvard University on it, migrationpatterns.org. I've already seen the state chamber send this out to folks. It's focused on young people migration trends, which are really interesting. So check that out as well. And then just a quick comment from the current population survey for this migration data. Current population survey is Census and Labor, Bureau of Labor. I did a really long presentation on it last series. We can make that available to folks. It is a rich source of economic data, workforce data, I would say. That's why we used it here in Nebraska, really interesting. But you really have to use the microdata to get very deep with it, which takes a little bit more analytic capacity. It's really only good for sort of statewide data. You really can't go to that level of geography. Lots of folks like to see counties, cities like that. But we'll look at that real quick. And if anybody's interested in that data set more, reach out to me. That's something I play with probably more often than others. I get asked for this particular slide all the time. I just pop it into an email. This is the percent of population that lives in a metro county versus a non-metro county. And that's because this is a really interesting and dynamic trend. If you go back to the 1900s, right? We are a rural state. Our geography is still very rural, right? Most of the state is rural, but most people live in a metropolitan area. Here with the metropolitan is those sort of core metro cities that we think of, Douglas, Sarpy, Lancaster, as well as the outlying counties that tend to be part of the metroplex. 65%. Basically, if we go to 1900, 65% lived in a non-metro county, and today 65% live in a metro. This is using 2020 data. For that number, we used to project out, and that projection was right on at 65%. Just point out, most of that is in the core metro. 1.18 million live in Douglas, Sarpy, Lancaster, Hall, and Dakota. So, right, even those outlying metro areas are not the big source of growth. That only goes up to 1.2 million if we include those. 1.18 in that core metro. That is our population center. This is a slide we've done a couple years. I haven't done it recently, but it gets at that very specific question someone asked about people moving from the western part of the state to the eastern part of the state. And it's not perfectly west to east, but we can kind of think about the groupings of counties that way. So here we're going to look at two factors. Net migration within Nebraska. So remember I said the American Community Survey says, do you live in the same house? Do you live in the same county? Do you live in a different county in the state? So that's the one we're interested in. Did you leave your county and move somewhere else in Nebraska? We also have net migration with other states. That's in the gray, and that's people who left that county or group of counties here to go somewhere else. And we absolutely see what they kind of call that Western migration, but I would just say rural to urban, rural to metro migration. So we're going to follow this along net migration within Nebraska, this red bar. These are 72 rural counties. We see about 1,700 people leaving. This is 2019 to 2020. That was pretty typical year. 2020 to 2021 was a little bit different, but that's what ACS is measuring here. Net migration within Nebraska, folks leaving rural counties. Micropolitan, North Platte, Beatrice, Columbus. We do see net migration out within Nebraska. I will say, I think 2017, 2016, they were still a little positive. They were pulling folks from these rural communities into these micropolitans. This particular year, we didn't see that. Again, most of that growth rate was looking over that 10-year period. So year to year, things are a little different than you might expect. But we see folks leaving there, about 1,300. We see folks leaving that outlying metro, Cass, Saunders, Seward, right? Again, sometimes those counties tend to be pulling people from elsewhere in Nebraska, but they lost a little bit less, 1,300 folks. So where did everybody go? They came right here. There you see a strong positive. It adds up pretty perfectly, 4,479 coming in to the core metro, right? But you also see folks leaving from all of these groups for other states. And of course, a little bit bigger group here, bigger population center. So we are absolutely, everybody in Nebraska is from Nebraska. I say this all the time. I've lived in New York, I've lived in North Carolina, I've lived in Texas, Kansas, and Nevada. But actually, all of those states tend to have a lot of folks from other places, except for Kansas. Nebraska, most people in Nebraska grew through natural change in Nebraska or moving from other parts of Nebraska into the core metro. This came up a lot in redistricting too. I would say senators asked, well, you know, all of that growth in those urban counties, are they Nebraskans? Why, yes, they are, right? These are folks that move from elsewhere in Nebraska into the core metro, and then natural change occurs. And so that population continues to grow. And then, of course, they lose some folks every year too. We'll talk more about them. I will say, even here within this idea of core metro, Douglas, Sarpy, Lancaster, we're seeing more suburbanization than urbanization. And I would say that was a big finding from the 2020 census nationally, but we definitely saw it here. So this is just 2010 to 2020 population in just Douglas County. So growth of 10% or more. So larger growth. And then the gray is decline. And you can see, right, the growth was downtown and on that western edge. If I added in Sarpy here, it's all red, right? This is by census tract. We'll talk a little bit about that geography later. Watch my time. Oh, okay. But, right, all of that red is on the periphery. That's suburbanization. I would say Sarpy and Lancaster are the major sources of growth here. That's where folks are moving to more than the urban core. So another dimension, right? All of these different ways to show change in the state doesn't always capture all of the detail that can be really important to your story too. And why I say, always feel free to reach out and ask us, what would you do? What do you think makes sense here? So let's go dig in a little bit to the domestic migration patterns. We have pretty consistently heard that we lose people to other states. We made an infographic that is a dashboard more that is online. Essentially, you can click on every state. The gray is international migration, the red is domestic migration, and you can actually see what states people are coming from and what states folks are leaving to. We haven't updated this dashboard with 2020 data. I have the overall data available. I didn't have some of the details, so that's why we haven't totally updated it. But it's interesting to kind of talk through and look at the trend. So again, this gray line is international migration. It's a couple thousand a year. It's about, so it's between 0 and 4,000. Back in 2016, it kind of went up, but that's where it's been about, and that's where it will sort of stay, I would assume. Domestic migration has been tracking down. So here in 2019, it was a little more than 4,000 people. Here's the number for 2020. Nebraska net lost 4,760 people to other states. Now remember, there is inflow and there is outflow. The inflow number is 47,681. I was actually sort of surprised by the dynamism. If you go to some other states on their domestic migration, right, their inflow outflow is in the their net is in the 60,000, 70,000s. But I was actually pretty surprised that our inflow of 47,000, our outflow though was greater, 52,000. So people are moving, right? We're not doing terribly. People come here just more leave every year than come. It's just a little bit more. But I'll also say, so this is that 2019, here's that 2020 number. I remember a lot of folks, and I think just being the Nebraska nice and positive that they are, kind of thinking COVID could be really good for Nebraska, right? Folks can enjoy the good life, have lots of space, not a lot of urban centers where COVID was spreading really rapidly. So kind of thinking people would come here more and sort of enjoy that good life and maybe pull that paycheck from New York City or California. That did not happen. The rate of loss to other states was higher in 2020 than pre-pandemic. And then when we go to that 2020 to 21 population estimates, we see a very similar thing on that negative for domestic migration, right? We're tracking down, not up. It's proportional. It's not a huge number, right? We're kind of in the middle. There's a little bit of stasis here, but I don't think we saw that 2020 boom that maybe we were hoping for. We'll definitely, like I said, 2020 to 2021, we can see that consistent in that different source. We'll pull that data for the ACS when it's available, hopefully here in the fall. But yeah, we're sort of, this suggests that we are tracking down on losing people to other states every year as compared to kind of turning that tide, which I know was a big part of a lot of policy discussions this year. So still lots to work on or think about. I don't bring this up as a negative. You know, I've actually heard people are like, don't talk about this so much, but can't solve a problem you're not aware of. You know, I think we can't rely on theory, right? There was a theory we might grow, but empirically we didn't as a result of COVID. So I think we need to rethink what's happening there. The next question I always get, well, who are these people leaving? This is another one you've seen from us year over year. This is how we track that brain drain number. And you will see that the trend holds up and is even a little bit stronger. So here you have high school graduate or less in the black, those folks that are some college or associate's degree in the light gray, and then those with a bachelor's degree or more. And you will see we are generally positive in those in high school graduate or less or some college or associate's degree. That means people come in every year. I have another graph that I'm not going to show today. I'll probably show in September. But the reason I believe that folks come here with those lower levels of education, we have more people that work in low wage jobs than high wage jobs. Low wage jobs are associated with folks that have lower levels of education. As a result, we're really strong on pulling those people, right? If we have a lot of low wage jobs, then folks come to take those jobs. We have fewer people working in high wage jobs than low wage jobs. That correlates with bachelor's degrees or more. So guess who leaves the state every year? And you can see that trend actually growing. And then again in 2020, oh, you can stay here and take online college from anywhere. We didn't see that, right? Those folks with bachelor's degrees are more left at a slightly higher rate than they have in years past. Again, migration here is, the numbers are just not so large. I also think it's really important to point this out. There's over 400,000 people here, age 25 or older, with a bachelor's degree in the state, actually working at a really high rate. I think we have tied with Minnesota for the highest rate of folks with a bachelor's degree in the labor force employed, right? So we have lots of folks with bachelor's degrees here working. It's not that everyone gets one and runs out the door, right? That's something we talk about here at the university a lot. Are we just educating people to go somewhere else? No, most of them stay, but we are losing folks with bachelor's degrees every year. And it is important to think about that. And it's important to kind of not rest on it, or that idea that, oh, the good life will come calling again. It didn't in 2020, right? It's actually up. This is from the current population survey. I've just run this number over and over. I continue to try to convince people of this point, right? When we say, why are they leaving? Why are they coming? I feel very clear that there are lots of reasons why someone moves, but if job opportunities or pay are going to be part of the mix. You don't have to have both, but you have to have one. And again, you might have gotten married and want to move out of state, other family reasons, right? I think all of these matter, but job opportunities or pay are going to matter probably more, right? I think about every move I made, and I mentioned I've made a lot. Job opportunities or pay were the drivers, right? I can't get that bachelor's degree and then not work and support my family and enjoy what a community has to offer if I don't have either job opportunity or pay. Sometimes it's the same thing, sometimes it's not. But this is actually a question on the current population survey. It says, why'd you move? And these are people that left Nebraska, new job or job transfer. A couple of years ago, we did something with the Omaha Chamber, and we asked folks on LinkedIn that had ever lived somewhere else, why did you move? And we saw the very same thing. They actually loved Nebraska. They loved the good life. They wanted, I think it was like 85% would move home, but they need that job opportunity or pay. Okay, next topic. I'm writing a grant report evaluation, and I want to know Nebraska's aging population versus our workforce, maybe kids age 5, that's direct quote, you know, like throw me some numbers about that composition, right? And that's very important, particularly in that workforce context. How many people are working versus how many people are using services. So going to look at that with the decennial census, population projections, U.S. Census Bureau's population and housing units estimates again, all ones I've talked about. I just threw in something from Bureau of Labor's local area unemployment statistics, a little bit about the labor force, and then the American Community Survey. So all ones we have seen. This is decennial census and projections. So going back in time, and honestly, I tried to update this slide just looking at a shorter time period, but the dynamism, right, the amount of change doesn't really come across without sort of looking at that span. And you can use different age groups to capture that prime age workforce. I like this broader 25 to 64 because this then encompasses a pretty large group. And we actually know that, again, Nebraskans, #1 in the country for folks age 55 plus who are still in the workforce. So, right, our workforce does span those broad years. So if you go back in time, the ratio of aging adults, that's 65 plus, to that workforce age was 6-1. So for every one kid or adult, right, those people that are not in the workforce, aging adult, there was someone in that prime age workforce. As you go over in time, 2010, we are 5-1. And if we project that out based on population dynamics, which we're pretty good at, by 2050, we're at 3-1. If you thought the workforce was tight now, if we do nothing, it is only getting tighter. And so if you look at this group right here, this is 2010 to 2030. These are the baby boomers. Right now, they're between 58 and 67. So, right, they should retire. They should at least get a chance to retire there at 58. We know many of them are still in the labor force, but they are going to retire. So that is this group in the gray, 65 plus. And we are actually at the cusp of this change, right? We're feeling it. It's tight. COVID did some things that made it tighter, but we're only going to feel it more, right? Because this group, you know, the Gen Y, the Gen X, the millennials, they're just not that natural change rate is tightening, not getting bigger. They're not as big a group. And so this line flattens as this line gets higher. And eventually people will leave the workforce, even if Nebraskans are extremely hardworking and work later in life. So we are feeling it. I would say, right, this is the start of it. Started back in 2010. We're feeling it. It's only going up 28 to 2030. So we are feeling that change. I will also say the population 65 plus varies pretty significantly across state, right? When we look at this, we're looking at statewide numbers. There are many counties where the population 65 and older is a lot higher than our average communities, right? 30%, 32%, 29%. And so there are lots of counties in Nebraska that are undergoing this change right now. And so a lot we can learn from each other, but also putting more pressure on the workforce in areas where there's already a lot of pressure on the workforce because of population loss. So lots to think about across the state as well with those numbers. A couple of things I just want to point out. I go all the time and I make presentations and somehow I put my foot in my mouth. So I just want to show something that I think happens a lot. And then you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. One, sometimes prime age workforce, couple different definitions float around, right? Like those, someone really asked me for the numbers one way. I think this came from the state chamber, can have 18 to 34. Sometimes we say prime age workforce starts at 25 because usually they're done with their educational level. So a couple different ways to define these concepts. So just be careful that you're using numbers that you think relate to whatever document you're trying to fill in or add. The other one is you got to think about the whole number versus the proportion. So here I've looked at the folks 18 to 34, and I did it as a percentage of the total population over time. So in 2010, there were 426,846 18 to 34-year-olds, and they were 23.4% of the population. Here in 2020, that same group is only 22% of the population. But the overall number is higher, right? 444,645. So depending on who you're talking to, right? The chamber, I think in that case, wanted to know that that number is growing, which is great. That number is growing. The proportion of the population is not growing. I see a lot of, this gets confused. I've seen it in documents. I've seen it in presentations. You know, I think I've made the mistake before where you kind of take a proportion of a proportion, and now that's a whole confusing number. I try to give people both numbers and then they can present it however they want. But I see this sort of mistake a lot. This is it again. I was presenting, someone from the Department of Economic Development presented, and I think I went first and I said, our labor force is not back. And then they got up and said, well, the governor's office is saying the labor force is back. So it was again, just this confusion between number and proportion. So this is labor force participation rate. So this is not worried, this is age 16 plus, and it's not worried about that specific group, but it's worried about how many people are employed, part-time employed, or looking for a job. So in January of 2020, right before all of this started, we see there's a little over 1 million folks. 70.2% of that population group of interest is in the labor force. By January 2022, so over the big hump, and you know, lots of really interesting dynamics going on in here. You know, we explored lots of those in other presentations. Happy to share if you're interested. But so we're back in terms of that total number. We're at 1,057,000, so a little bit larger number of folks in the labor force by January of 2022, but 69.8% of the population. So the population grew, that overall population of interest grew, but there are definitely people that could be in the labor force that aren't in the labor force anymore, right? And we know lots of folks retired early, and some folks didn't go back because once they went home, they went, this is for me. Not me, but I thought about it, that's for sure. So just kind of a point of clarification when exploring particularly these age groups over time. The age groups are getting bigger, our population has grown, but the percent of the population that falls into these different categories is not growing necessarily, right? We know there's pressure as people move into these different age intervals. I'm writing a grant report or evaluation, and I want to know number of different racial and ethnic groups for each county. I get this question all the time, particularly by age cohorts. I think that has a lot to do with schools, that has school planning, lots to do. I think it was from the court system asked about that one the other day. Comes up all the time. We did something for the Crime Commission a year or so back where we looked at this by age cohorts and how they're changing. Generally, younger folks are more diverse in Nebraska as well as nationally. So just kind of understanding how we are diversifying, where we are diversifying, and who is this group of diverse folks. Lots of sources here. We're going to use the visualization library from the U.S. Census Bureau. They did a lot of work, 2020 census, on a dashboard of all of this. Really helpful to compare to other states in this particular case. Decennial Census, American Community Survey, and I even provide a little video from the Census Bureau because it was really helpful for me when I started doing some demographics by race or ethnic group. 2020 Census Dashboard on race and ethnicity has detailed information on all groups, all states, and then you can even dig in on county. 2020 Census was very careful about how they measured and asked the questions, particularly in the Hispanic Latino group. So if you go into here, you're going to see white alone or white in combination, black alone, black in combination, multiracial, two or more, right? There are all of these different categories, and we want to understand the full descriptive detail of how people identify. I think it's really important to understand it. I think we get used to classifying them very specifically, and there is more diversity than I think we have been using in descriptions. So I really think this dashboard is helpful because you can see how much we did measure and how diverse the population is, and all the descriptive terms we might use to sort of categorize and understand race and ethnicity in Nebraska. So really highly suggest this. This is a screenshot from them, so it's not great. Here's Nebraska, 84.5% white alone. We are in the top. Actually, here's Nebraska, 78%. Sorry, this is Iowa is 84%, but obviously both very white, predominantly white states. If you jump over here, just to show you some really interesting facts, here's Iowa, and then we went percent American Indian and Alaska Native alone or in combination, right? So thinking about those different groups and how they relate to each other, I think it's really important to sort of understand all of those categories. A lot of people say, I want to know Black. Well, what about Black and Latino, right? That's a different category because that's an ethnicity. And you'll see that up here at the top. You can do both race by ethnicity or looking just at Hispanic origin with racial combinations. So sometimes kind of sending people here to figure out just what they're really asking. A lot of times, I actually pulled this slide now. I wish I'd put it back in. I just do person of color. I think a lot of times we're just trying to understand, right, how that group of folks that are not white, that is predominant in Nebraska and Iowa and the region, which is not true for all other states, as you can kind of see here, how folks might be experiencing their communities differently as a result of their race or ethnicity. And so a lot of times I really just do person of color. That helps people clarify those groups. They don't necessarily have to think about those combinations, but sometimes I think it's really important to see what we have there. This is something I just did. This was as a result of redistricting too. Again, there were some perceptions that it is the urban areas that are diversifying faster. And there are more folks that are more diverse in a lot of urban areas of the state because there are more people there. But while the percent of population that identifies as a person of color has increased in all counties, actually increased fastest 2010 to 2020 in non-metropolitan counties of Nebraska. So again, rural and urban should be learning from each other because you're experiencing these demographic trends and changes at different time periods. So Dakota, Colfax, Dawson, Hall, the only metro county up there, has diversified pretty quickly. But sort of an interesting pattern that, again, I don't think people realize that our rural communities, while they're losing population, their demographics are pretty dynamic. Another one, this has come up in a lot of places. I think there is some folks in Nebraska that will assume that that Latinx community is the same as the immigrant community or foreign born. That is not true. Here's just a quick facts. Every county you can get on here, I think you can go back to 2012, it's on our website, and you can see all sorts of different demographic data by county. We just find these are questions people ask all the time. So here it is, quick and easy. Try to keep it updated as the Census Bureau updates their data. It's majority from the American Community Survey. Scottsbluff is an outlier here, don't get me wrong, but I think it's really interesting. 24% of the population are Latinx, only 3.7% are foreign born. I just did some work on LB 1024, the North and South Omaha ARPA bill. And even in South Omaha, that has a higher percent Latinx, a higher percent foreign born than some other areas of the state. The majority of the group that was foreign born has been here since before 2010. The American Community Survey asked that level of detail. I think it's really interesting. So just reminding folks that if you run into someone in Nebraska, they're probably a Nebraskan. Data gems, the racial and ethnic data is really important. Lots of different descriptive terms. There are lots of ways to access this data. So some of those, and this will be a good question for Carol later too, if you go to the American Community Survey data.census.gov breakout. So some of the sort of overview demographic profile data will give you data on race and ethnicity, but sometimes you want to see for a particular race and ethnicity. Let's say I want to see it for the Latinx community in a geography. What are their, tell me a little bit about them. And there is a really specific way to do that on data.census.gov where you can go to tables just for those different racial or ethnic groups. This is a really helpful video for that. So if you're looking for age breakdowns from the American Community Survey by racial or ethnic group, this is one way to do it. There are other ways to do it as well. Someone asked the other day, I think this was the court system, they were like, well, what's the easiest? I was like, well, as you go deeper, right, like the data gathering gets a little bit more difficult. But this is a helpful video to start to think about different demographic groups, different communities, and how to go deeper within them. Okay, doing great on time. Getting close to the end. I'm writing a grant report evaluation, and I want to know, this was again a direct quote, income or poverty data at the block or block group level. So we'll talk a little bit about geographies here. Mostly I'm going to use the American Community Survey. Again, I think I mentioned at the beginning, poverty comes up all the time, right? Poverty is generational, systemic, cyclical, once in, very hard to get out. And these are, you know, things as a community and a society we have to be really cognizant of in order to support people, because poverty is not good for anybody. Non-metro counties in Nebraska have a higher poverty rate than metro counties. This is again a dashboard we have on our website. You can go and see this updated for 2020. There's the link. We also have under age 5 and in poverty, and 65 plus and in poverty. And in both of those groups, it kind of stays the same. So you will see some of the urban portions of the state, 10%, 5%, 11%. It's not necessarily low. I think we're about 8% overall. But you go to lots of different rural counties, 16%, 12%, 17%, 19%. So poverty is actually a little bit higher in many of these non-metro counties or rural counties. And so really important to pay attention to. I think it doesn't get seen as much, right? The geographic area allows us to kind of not see it the way we might see it in urban areas, but real challenges for all portions of the state. Overall, Nebraska is not a high number of folks in poverty. Remember, we have a high number of working poor or folks that work even full-time year-round and in poverty. So it's something we should certainly think about in our workforce, but still a challenge here in the state. Now, that particular question asked about block and block groups. So I'm going to talk about them, but I'm also going to suggest never to use block or block groups. And I'll show you why. So this is actually, I mapped this on data.census.gov, can be a really awesome mapping tool. You can turn these red numbers off, but they're important for this example. These are census tracts in Douglas, Sarpy, and a little bit into Potawatomi County in Iowa. I don't know my census tract. I wonder, how many of you know your census tract? So if you're here in Douglas County, you can try to find it. And this is also mapping this idea of below poverty in this area. So it is interesting to go down to the census tract level. I think those folks that asked about the block or block group level were spot on, right? Poverty, even within the county, is not similar across the county. And here we see really high levels of poverty as you kind of go east and as you go west, except for a couple little areas. I think that's Boys Town, so don't worry about it. Right, it goes down. So we definitely sometimes want to go to a geography below the county level, just like a lot of times, right? The Nebraska numbers are pretty rosy, but if we go down to the county level, we see some detail. Here, what I've done, you have census tracts, you have block groups. So we're looking right here, 11 and 12. There's 11, census tract 11, census tract 12. And in census tract 11, there are two block groups, 1 and 2. And then the white lines are actually the block. You can get block level data. Don't suggest it. We worked with it for redistricting. It was not fun, but you're only going to get that in big chunky numbers. But even within this, so now you're going to report to someone in census tract 11 of Douglas County in Nebraska, block group 1 is different than block group 2. These are actually showing total population 2020, not poverty, because they can't really show it. They have some data at that block group level, but not all. So yeah, here in 12, you have block group 1, 2, and 3. My point here is that people don't know these geographies at all, right? And so if you're trying to make some of those larger points about a community, block and block group level data, one is going to be really hard to work with. It's going to have really weird names. You're going to have to map it. And it may not, even then, it may not make a ton of sense to people. People don't really sort of take action at those levels. Census tract is interesting, don't get me wrong. Block group is interesting. You're going to have variety here. But you're kind of setting yourself up for a really difficult challenge. And you'll see throughout this, right? Even grouping counties. I think I did one slide at the census tract level. Even then, we're kind of messing with people's head, right? You have to think about what's that different group and how does it work together. And so, and you're going to have data availability issues. They're going to de-identify data at that level. The differential privacy was a new policy with the 2020 census data that is intentionally using the real data, but obfuscating that for folks that don't know how to use it quite right. So yeah, I wouldn't ever suggest pulling data at the block or block group level. This is something I've done just recently. And it's really, this is that point kind of where we'll go in September. It's not just about having lots of data, it's about using it in really smart and effective ways that people can understand. So we worked with Olson and Associates on LB 1024. There'll be a big report at some point. We provided the demographics, workforce, and housing section. So I probably pulled 30 to 40 variables, all from mostly the American Community Survey. I think I used the current population survey a little bit, to look at the differences between North Omaha, South Omaha. Then I chose to do the balance of Douglas County, so all the census tracts not in North, South, and Omaha, and then for another benchmark, Nebraska. These are groups. That particular bill defines North and South Omaha, so people know what we mean. I think at that neighborhood level, a lot of you probably know what we mean in terms of area, if you're from the area. And then we pulled data for that group. I worked up from census tracts, and I used whole census tracts. Someone not too long ago asked us to recreate the redistricted legislative district. It cuts census tracts, it cuts counties, right? So It gets hard to think at the neighborhood level because it can be different in these census geographies, but you can make it work. They're pretty small. I did not need to go to the block group level at all to do this. And we built up into neighborhoods that I think are really meaningful to people and helpful for people, much more so than, again, fun, right? If I sent a big Excel file of every block group in North Omaha, who would know what to do with it or how to interpret it? And yet, look how clear that is. Percent in poverty in North and South Omaha is much higher than the balance of Douglas County, which is a really interesting sort of benchmark. And then Nebraska, which is an important benchmark just because we all know it, right? So kind of interesting to explore. That particular group asked about income too. This is another place where you really have to make choices with what you report. Here I did median income for all workers, and then below it is median income for full-time workers, because full-time workers tend to make more. And I did sort of just note here, so 33,908 versus 45,814. We're competitive in the region for both groups. We are not competitive nationally. Like I said, I've done some workforce data, actually pulled this specifically for the healthcare industry and a couple other industries, and we're really not competitive on, especially in high wage industries, even in our region. So that is what I have. I was going to do a breakout later because we have a smaller number joining us online today. I'm not, but just so you know, when we post the slides, my breakout slides are right here for you. So you'll have everything that I would normally have. And I would love to take questions. Okay. Leslie asks, on the list of reasons for people moving from Nebraska, have you considered asking if it's related to politics? Let's answer that question. So actually pretty recently, Nebraska Public Media, it was during the Supreme Court case around abortion, and they kind of asked me the same thing. Do I think it's politics? I think it's a really fair question. I think in this particular case, we as individuals are really good examples of why someone might move. I think politics does factor in. I think quality of life factors in. I think climate factors in. But I think job opportunities and pay factor in more, right? And I'll say to some extent, this is a theory. Like I said, I have some data in this area. Job opportunities and pay are consistently at the top of that current population survey. It was pretty strong in our survey. Anyone would like to pay me to do this survey, I'm happy to do it every year. It's really interesting to me too. There is some research in this area. And like I say, I think all of those matter and they factor in, right? It's a multi-factor decision. You don't pick up tomorrow, move to another state just because, I mean, there's probably some of that, but not a lot of that. And so I think it's going to be multi-factor. But if I disagree with the politics, but I don't have a job opportunity in the next state, how do I go? You know what I mean? I can't participate in politics if I don't have a job opportunity or pay that allow me to participate in politics. Just like climate. I think a lot of people move to the coast for great climate, but they have to have job opportunities or pay that allow them. Now, retirees are kind of interesting. We actually know a lot of retirees stay here in Nebraska. Just did a presentation at the Elder Justice Training for DHHS, and I'm going to forget the exact percentage, but I think it was like 93% of folks 65 plus lived in the same house as last year. So that's a pretty good indicator that folks stay in place. It's a really good question, Leslie. We don't know how much of a factor. I think it would be interesting to see which one matters the most, but I think job opportunities and pay, especially here in Nebraska, where we have such a workforce culture, we're such a hardworking group of people, and all of these metrics Nebraskans work, I think it's still got to be a driver even when they leave Nebraska. Okay, we asked for our creative districts to provide information on their boundaries, which may be neighborhoods, i.e. census tracts. We don't want to set them up for failure. So what do you recommend when we ask them to show growth and employment in population, et cetera? This is from Jennifer from the Nebraska Arts Council, and let's talk. I'm so interested. This one happens a lot, right? Even so, the jurisdictions that the Census Bureau makes, that a city makes, that a city annexes and expands into, right? Like those are very dynamic, changing things. Even a neighborhood is sort of dynamic and changing, and a lot of sort of how we think about a place is less so, or like vice versa. Census tracts, they'll add census tracts and things like that, but zip codes, right? They're pretty settled until we hit some kind of population change. So it can be a challenge. I see lots of, so we did educational service units for redistricting. They're a great example. I think when educational service units were created, they really wanted them to represent whole school districts, but school districts change all the time. So, and then redistricting means equal population. So within districts, so we cut school districts, we cut counties, we had to cut, cities, and it's confusing, and it makes voting confusing. My gosh, voting is confusing, especially in a state with all these sort of layers. Geographies are confusing. And finding geographies that are meaningful for folks are confusing. I'll look at the Arts Council probably during break. I'm kind of interested. So you should find things that are meaningful to your service area. You should try not to cut jurisdictions. So if you have to cut a county, in terms of data challenges, it really ups them, right? If you have to go down to the census tract level, it becomes more difficult to pull that data even, right? And I love when you guys outsource projects to me. That's how we pay the bills here at CPAR. But we also really want I think when people gather the data themselves, analyze the data themselves, they own the data a little bit more and they're more likely to apply it. So we don't want to outsource too much or make it too complicated. So I would say anything particularly statewide, if you cannot cut a county, you're going to make it easier to collect data. So then you're just pulling for a multi-county area, and then you can take the average or the sum or whatever. That would be my best suggestion. If your jurisdictions already cut counties, then we can kind of talk about how to go down for there, or maybe it's time for a change. We've used the community college districts for some of our work with the Nebraska Business Development Center, and they don't follow the community college districts, but they tend to be sort of regions folks know. So those are another sort of regional grouping that can be really useful. If I could get everyone on the same page with what a region is, that would be great. Hope that helps, but I'll reach out. Love to talk more. Is the decennial census community level data available for communities under 5,000 yet? Can we get more granular for rural counties down to the community level? There is a lot more available. 2020 census data, especially by age group, rolled out pretty slow. It is on now. They kind of didn't make as big of a to-do about it, but it is on now. You can go deeper. Remember, rural counties, differential privacy is going to affect you more. And I think I would argue, right, there's some places where granular does not necessarily help that much. So, reach out. I'd love to talk more, but there is more data available. We'll make more data available, and we can support you in finding more data. Another question, several data sources aside from census data, how often is data being collected and who is collecting it? Oh my gosh. So mostly what I covered here is different census data sources, but I think a lot of people just think census data is one thing. There are a lot of different sources within census data. So just sort of be aware of that. What you'll find on our website is mostly census data. It's just that we pull it for geographies we think are interesting. We pull numbers that people ask us very often, or things people want to track very often. So it's a little easier to come get it for us, mostly for Nebraska, but we have some national and regional ones as well. There's also, I talked about the US Bureau of Labor. They have a lot of workforce data. Their data can be a little bit more timely, but then sometimes a little bit more challenging to use. I don't think we talked about anything else in this presentation, but I know in the housing presentation, Michael Norton's going to talk about some other sources too. So if you're interested in sort of other places, I would say a lot of different places too now are making dashboards that aggregate census data in different ways too. Got to kind of just check your source. Okay, what are some of the other theories we are considering to explain why there is net outmigration in Nebraska? I'm interested. I'm interested too. I definitely hear them a lot. I think I hear taxes the most. I think it's interesting. I don't, right? It goes a lot to job opportunities and pay. I think people focus more on gross than net with pay. I've actually heard that theory in some economics, right? If you give me more money in my check, even though I'm moving to a state that's higher tax, I'm going to do it. I just did it. I actually lived in Nevada and Texas where there's no income tax. I left both places. Right? I am not the definitive on that. Probably some people would say I don't make great decisions at all. So I can't always use me as an example there, but I do think with the tax thing is interesting. I think people get here and are a little frustrated by taxes. I've heard that story too, but with job opportunities and pay, they tend to focus more on that growth. So what the job is offering versus what it means in terms of quality of life. I know I've seen those cost of living calculators. We actually pay for a cost of living data for metro regions every quarter. And yeah, housing, especially in Omaha, but also in Grand Island and Kearney, is really expensive. I think that factors in. I don't think it's the only factor. So lots of cost stuff, quality of life, climate. I mean, climate is a draw, but then, I mean, you have Idaho and Utah. People are moving. You know, there are elements of there that I could see people liking the climate, but not totally. So yeah, I think there's a full range of quality of life factors that people consider. I still think job opportunities and pay are the driver. How can we best use census data with other data sets, i.e. voter turnout and other surveys? Great question. Voter turnout has been a topic lately, getting lots of emails from different folks about how to use voter data. It's a challenge, and it's not just on Nebraska. Voting, right? Different counties have different election systems, different capacity to report different voting systems. So voter turnout data, county to county, is not very good. So then you go up to the Secretary of State's office, you can buy a voter turnout file. It's $500, or last I heard, I think they can change the price. I think we bought it in 2016. I have no intention of buying it again. If someone would like me to buy it though, I'm happy to support them in analyzing it. And it's a big, messy data set, right? It's not summary level, it's address level, right? So there's lots of challenges in voting like that. I will tell you very often, we talk about this. So if you're gonna do a survey, ask demographics that are similar to the demographics asked on the American Community Survey, because you're gonna wanna match that data. The Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska is a good one. They did a big survey, and we're also giving them a bunch of demographic profiles from the American Community Survey. It's easier if those questions match. So if you're going to collect your own data, really look at the survey. And I highly suggest that people look at the actual survey, like how did you ask that question? And to the extent possible, match it. We're doing a project with DoSpace. They gave out 1,000 computers in mostly the Omaha area to people in need that don't have good digital access. And we're going to do the evaluation. We're going to do 4 surveys. We are going to match the demographic questions on the surveys to the American Community Survey to the extent possible. They go pretty detailed because that'll allow us to generalize a little bit easier. So one way to do it, Sandy, is to look at the questions. Thinking about big chunky geographies that people understand, like counties. I've seen people mess up neighborhood to neighborhood, what that means. Zip codes are another good one. I didn't really mention in that census tract one. Use those zip codes whenever possible. That is helpful. You just kind of got to, what can you match? What can you be honest that doesn't match? I think it's okay to say, this isn't the same as this, but this is what we know about this group, and this is what that comparison group is. We know it's not the same, but it's helpful in some ways. There's something I'd love to talk more about. Going along with the measurement of broadband access, have there been census metrics for growth of workforce housing workers? I think WFH workers, I think that's workforce housing, or remote worker growth in Nebraska, retaining salaries of locations outside the state. Super great question. Okay, so a couple things, right? Census really provides, for the American Community Survey, that's where we get a lot of that depth, that socioeconomic depth. Who are they? Where do they live? What kind of broadband access do they have? What's their salary? Now, we don't have a lot of good salary change information in American Community Survey, but we can go pretty deep on that. I think it's interesting to look at sort of the growth of population groups or migration of population groups by educational attainment, by income, by age. We can do lots of that. We have done lots of that. Like I say, I think we tend to be growing in, I think of it as a low wage group. If WFH is workforce housing, that's been a big challenge. I actually like to use the word middle income housing because we happen to know that people below middle income also work. So I don't love the term workforce housing. We did an infographic on it for Senator Matt Williams a couple of years ago. So I just happened to have the time to talk about that. So the American Community Survey has that detail. American Community Survey is cross-sectional. It's a snapshot in time. So when you get into retaining people or how people have changed over time in the workforce, remote worker growth in Nebraska, or retaining salaries, things like that, I tend to jump to the current population survey, which is a longitudinal survey. I can actually track individuals over time. It has monthly data, so you can kind of see movement a little bit more, and you can look at that cross-sectionally or longitudinally, but the geography goes down. So then I can't really talk about metro versus non-metro counties because the current population survey is smaller. So it's something we definitely have a challenge with. I think that's always a big question. We want to know how individuals are changing over time in the state, and we really just get snapshots of people over time. It's a challenge. Again, if you would like to do a longitudinal survey, I'm available. But we can do some things in that area using different surveys and different surveys for different purposes. So if you want to talk more about that, let's do. Mike might have some more on sort of housing expenses too later. Sorry. Oh, it's okay, Rachel. Is there any information available on 65 plus moving to retirement communities and portion from within Nebraska, those moving into those communities from outside Nebraska? Okay, I have just recently started to look at this. I could probably go in a little more depth. It really looks to me, right, we talk a lot about aging in place and that being important for Nebraska. It seems to me folks age in place here in Nebraska. That's what the majority are doing. So that's really exciting. That's a good source of population for us, and retirement income. And it sort of says a lot about the quality of life in Nebraska, right, if folks want to stay. So that's what I tend to seeing. Moving into retirement communities, we can get some data like that from group quarters. So that is folks that live in institutions like a retirement community, but a retirement home would definitely be in there. And something I haven't done too much on, but we could certainly look at that. What I am seeing generally though, is that aging Nebraskans tend to stay in Nebraska. Where exactly in Nebraska they are probably moving to retirement communities that are not necessarily in their hometown, but maybe close. Oh, sorry. Okay, Can you talk more about the methodological differences between the decennial census and the data sets the census collects off years? Sure. Really important question. Still doing good on time. Sorry, I'm a fast talker, but remember, you'll get the video and you can kind of go back, especially as we get into these questions. So let me just bring up one of these that has a couple of different data sets on it. Because I think this is something we can really be helpful with, right? You all know what you're trying to demonstrate or show. We can help say this survey over this survey, here are the pros and cons there. The decennial censuses, I've been avoiding saying because it's hard to say. The decennial census is a count of every person in the United States every 10 years. It's in the Constitution, right? We have to do this thing. And it has all sorts of unbelievable consequences. But it's actually a very short survey. We're really just trying to figure out who's where they are at that point in time. We're trying to get those total population numbers. So it doesn't go into that depth that you normally see about individuals, right? When I'm describing poverty and incomes and movement and housing quality, right? Or broadband access. That demographic richness is most likely from the American Community Survey. Hopefully you're seeing that fine. Now, that demographic richness is probably from the American Community Survey. And the American Community Survey is not like the decennial census, in which they don't try to count every individual. They count every individual, right? They send you the survey, then they go to your house and they're like, someone lives in this house. Can you fill out this survey? Right? Fill out this census, right? I think that's an important term. The American Community Survey is a survey. So in a survey, you take a sample, right? You ask some group. Now, the American Community Survey is a very large sample survey, but you ask a sample and then you generalize to the whole population. So if this many people live in the census tract, from our sample, we assume this many people live in the census tract overall, right? It's a survey. We all have done surveys, thought about surveys, read surveys. It's the best survey in the country, right? Like for instance, political polls. They ask a sample and then they try to generalize to the population. They're terrible at it, right? Last couple presidential elections, nobody got it right. So what I would say is it is a very large sample. The larger the sample, the more quality, the more rigor, the more generalizability. So I have a lot of confidence in it when they estimate to the total population, which the American Community Survey tries to do. They try to give you the actual number based on that survey. And there's this difference between this 1-year estimates and the 5-year estimates. 1-year estimates basically gives the sample generalized to the full population based on 1 year of data. They kind of smooth. So 5-year estimates, it's still really for that last year, but they're looking at the data over the 5-year to kind of hold up and make sure this is a really good estimate. So most everything you saw from me today is from the 5-year estimates. If it's from the American Community Survey, the only benefit I think of the 1-year estimates is it comes out earlier. So you can start to look at things. I tend to use larger geographies. If I use the 1-year estimates, I'll think Nebraska or nationally rather than going down to that census tract level. At those smaller levels, I want really big samples that come from my 5-year estimates. I'm going to just touch on one more census product because I think it's really interesting, and that's those population. U.S. Census Bureau population and housing units estimates. So totally different than decennial census and the American Community Survey. I like to think about it, right? Survey, someone's going out to the community and asking. Population and housing units estimates, these are our data nerds. They're in an office and they're using administrative data and statistics to estimate that population. So they're not going to go into detail because they don't know that, they're not talking to real people. They're looking at statistical procedures and trying to sort of get at what is the difference year to year using those major components of population change, natural change, international migration, and domestic migration, right? So much simpler set of factors. little bit more statistical power in that they're really just estimating a few things versus survey having sort of that richness. So 3 very different products, all at one amazing federal bureau. Thank you to the Census Bureau for producing any and all of that. Still doing good. Okay. So I think we have some in our chat. Q&A. Anybody else questions? Happy to take them here with you now, and then knowing that you're going to get to go deeper on a couple topics here in a minute. Work from home workers, not workforce housing. Okay, that makes more sense. Sorry. So, and I think that was probably related to the migration data. So here's what I think people thought, right? During COVID, you can make your big salary that you make in other states, but you can live in Nebraska, space out a little bit, hang out, live the good life. We didn't see it. We didn't see it in 2020 solidly. Now, COVID kind of stretched on and people changed over time, right? 2020 was a year of kind of no movement. 2021 will be really interesting. But I did this with the current population survey work, and I could track this monthly. So the current population asked like 4 additional questions, which is also really amazing that they added these questions because of COVID. And one of them was, could you work from home? And I tracked the US rate and I tracked the Nebraska rate. Nebraska was pretty consistently under, right? So 2 things about that. A low wage workforce is more likely to have to work in person. We have a larger low wage than high wage workforce, right? Me, high wage worker, can go home, professional development, technical services. I'm actually in my office, but I don't need to be anywhere to do my job. Manufacturing, transportation, logistics, those folks had to be in place. That's more of our workforce here. So they didn't work from home at the same high rate. I think then you can kind of think about culturally, well, if a lot of people don't work from home, did we work from home? So I just don't think Nebraska did very well attracting that work from home workforce, probably at a cultural level. Then we also have challenges with broadband. We know that. I didn't cover it here, but we have lots of data on that we can share across the state. Broadband access is a challenge. It's not as much of a challenge. I actually do the Nebraska Community Foundation's youth survey. Awesome survey. We ask young people, what do you like about Greater Nebraska? And they love Greater Nebraska. And this year, because of COVID, I slipped in a few questions about broadband. And they actually had really good internet access at home. They had access to devices. I was even a little surprised. So we say it's pretty bad. It's probably not as bad as we think. I think we saw in the Iowa tribe of Kansas, Nebraska, it's not very good. So there are definitely places, but can't work from home without broadband access, can't work from home if you don't have a job that allows you to work from home. And there's lots of those jobs everywhere where working from home is not as capable. We also tracked housing prices. You know, they spiked everywhere. They spiked here too. They spike in rural Nebraska. Rural Nebraska, and Mike can probably get into this more, we definitely have sort of a low stock problem. Low stock, high demand, prices go up. And so there is a low stock in housing everywhere in Nebraska. And so it really pushes those prices up, and you can't just pop into Nebraska, get a nice little home in the suburbs and start typing on your computer, I think, as easily as we hoped we could. So I hope that gets at more of that. I probably did more of that last year, but always really interested in updating that data and talking about that. I think especially now with those migration release data, we didn't see what we expected. So now we got to go deeper into why. Question about the Census Bureau and the 2020 census, particularly, I think that immigration question is being talked about. The American Community Survey always asks if you were born in another country, what year did you move here? What language do you speak? Those are actually really common questions on the American Community Survey. They are not on the census. There was a Supreme Court case on that as well. We did a little infographic about it back in 2020. It definitely undermines sort of the quality that we ascribe to these data sources. I think just anytime we politicize data, we are entering an area where people start to feel unsure about it. We heard a lot of pushback in Nebraska during redistricting, especially about the 2020 census counts and could we trust it and how could we trust it? I choose to trust. That's who I am. I don't know that totally asked the question that came into the chat, but it's really something I think you all as data users in Nebraska can really talk about. Here's why I use this survey, here's when I use it, and here's what value it brings to me, right? Making decisions with evidence is probably the best feeling in the world, as far as I'm concerned, right? When you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and it's motivated and clear, and there's a path, go do it, right? And this idea that sometimes we just don't know, but we have to do, I find that very challenging. So I know the Census Bureau works really hard, even in challenging political climates, to provide this data, to have a lot of confidence in this data. They don't publish things they don't have confidence in. All the time, people send me a link and they're saying, hey, I'm looking at this data and I can't get, age 65 plus and retired among the Latinx community in Census Tract 9. Yeah, they suppressed that data. They're not going to provide that because now they're worried about identification issues, or they're worried about the quality, right? The margin of error goes up. Now we don't know if that estimate is true. So they just don't report it. And so even in what they don't report, it builds confidence for me and understanding that, we're doing the best we can with all the tools we have. But you'll talk to Carol and Kim later and you'll know just how trustworthy that group of folks is. Okay, I think that's all. And we are coming right on time. Remember, right, we are here all year long, right? I am not a 9-month employee. I do not get to go home in the summer. We are here all year long to do this. We love to do it at the data conference. We love to answer these questions here in one place live together, to think about it together, but we're here all year long to do this. And so if you're just looking for that data point you saw on that slide one time, here you go. If you're wanting to do your own research and analysis, if you want to set up systems to track certain data over time, we love talking to you about that. There's so many different ways to work with us all year long. I hope this conversation was helpful to get you started, and all of those folks I said I could reach out to or want to reach out to me, please do email us. Lots of people do all the time. You saw those direct quotes today, or just check out our website. We try to publish as much of that data, right? If someone keeps asking me for the same set of data, I might just throw it in the dashboard. It's on the website. Everyone can have it. A lot of times if we send more complicated data to someone, we might publish it later because we want everybody to have it too. So we're here for all of that, and for just talking through some of these harder issues about how to use the data, when to use the data, which source, when to trust it, when to be worried about it. I think really exciting, we kind of got into those questions that will come up more in September. We really want to talk about, okay, sometimes you just got to report that one data point. Sometimes you've got to come up with what that data point should be and why and how, and convince everybody that you can trust this. This is how we know, and this is why we're doing what we're doing. So we're going to go so deep on those topics in September. Thanks so much.